Here we are at, time is it here? 1:30 in the morning on April 3rd, 2 days past the deadline for the budget. I was sitting in my office watching the debate online on one computer, and on another computer I was reviewing the news. The world outside is fixated on COVID-19, the pandemic that's sweeping the world, and rightfully so. It's bizarre that when I look at the other computer and I see what we're discussing issues of public policy.
No, there's one more.
With the background of a pandemic that needs our attention, we're talking about issues that are so far afield from the budget. Policy issues that should not be discussed at 2 o'clock in the morning and should not be discussed in the context of a budget. Some of them are very bad. Some of them are poorly conceived, solutions to real-life problems. Some of them are poorly drafted. Some of them are wasting money on wrong-headed priorities that could wait. And why are we here? We're here because the governor insists that his agenda be dealt with first. There's an old line that says, "Don't waste a crisis." Well, he's misusing this crisis to the fullest extent. And I want to just express a disappointment. Our current governor has risen to the occasion. He has provided leadership in a world that is lacking leadership to deal with the pandemic that's sweeping the world. He's declared war, he's rallied everyone around him, and he's gained the admiration of almost all of the people who see him. But at the same time, he somehow cannot continue with the same approach when it comes to governing the state of New York outside of the pandemic. And that's why we are sitting here discussing all of these issues. We should be talking about a COVID budget. Out in the real world, people are starting to go hungry. People need food because they don't have jobs. Yes, there was a problem before this, but now it is really exaggerated. We need to be doing something to make sure there's enough food out there for all of the people of the state of New York. And I see very little in this budget that has anything to do with that problem. We need to have medical care for an awful lot of people who don't have health insurance and have no way of getting medical care. We should be waiving the requirements for Medicaid. We should be inviting everyone into Medicaid. We should be providing everyone with health care who doesn't have it. And we should be using Medicaid to do that. But instead, Mr. Speaker, this budget bill does just the opposite. It's really bizarre. It's really bizarre, but it puts further restrictions on Medicaid. 30% of the people of the state of New York are touched by Medicaid. 30%. 3 million adults, 2.5 million children, 600,000 seniors are dependent on Medicaid. And this budget makes it more difficult to access Medicaid, and this budget will provide fewer services through Medicaid. I want to talk in particular about people with special needs. There's been almost no discussion about our most vulnerable. When we started to discuss this budget, I was hoping there was going to be a chance to improve an inadequate system. A system that is so inadequate that it's often an impediment. But this budget will actually make it worse. The biggest need is for staff. There are so few, and all are underpaid. This budget is no help. And this budget makes it more difficult It increases the requirements to become eligible for Medicaid. It's declaring war on our most vulnerable. I just want to refer to one thing our health chair referred to before. He used the example of someone was asked a question about dementia. Can somebody get home care if they have dementia? And he said, this budget adds an additional requirement. It's not enough that you have dementia. And I thought of a story that actually two news stories that I read for two different incidents about a month ago. About a woman who works in Manhattan, lives in Manhattan, her mother lives in the Bronx, and she would every day go see her mother because her mother lived alone and had dementia. And the health insurance that she had would provide only 4 hours a day. And she actually had a camera in various parts of her mother's apartment so she could watch her mother. And one day she found that her mother wasn't there. She rushed to the Bronx and found her a couple of blocks away, called the insurance company and said, I need more than 4 hours. And they said no. A second time, she rushed to the Bronx because her mother wasn't there. And her mother wasn't to be found. 4 days later, her mother was found dead in one of the rivers in the Bronx. There was another story very similar that repeated that. So now not only is it private insurance that creates that kind of a situation, thanks to the leadership of the executive, we're going to do the same thing with Medicaid. Medicaid requires that you be in poverty. It forces people into poverty to qualify. And now people will have to wait 2.5 years in poverty before they get help, before they get Medicaid. That's despicable, totally despicable. And at the same time, this budget continues corporate welfare in the guise of economic development. And it even settles some scores that somebody had with the minor parties. And at a time when we're trying to make ballot access easier for people, this budget limits the voters' choices by making it harder for minor political parties to get on the ballot. So, Mr. Speaker, I think this is a terrible budget. But we don't have much choice. We tried. We even waited past the April 1 deadline. Our Speaker and our staff fought day after day around the clock in very difficult circumstances for the things that we in this House believe in. And we ended up with this. I just look on TV and see all of those nurses, all of those doctors, all of those first responders. So despite my feelings about this budget, I'm going to vote yes for the first responders because they deserve to get paid.